This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner Trisonic, a results-focused agency that plans and buys all audio media. Check them out at trisonic.co.uk.
Even versus 2022, and definitely versus 2020, we're now getting about 1 in 3 papers being media agency entries, whereas even 4 years ago, something like 1 in 5. So that, over a short period of time, that I think is quite dramatic.
Hello and welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Omar Oakes again, and we're back with another episode where we probe the most influential, interesting and innovative people in media and advertising. And today I am joined by the IPA's Director of Effectiveness, Laurence Green. Laurence is one of the UK's most renowned advertising strategists and creative leaders. He was founder of the agencies Fallon London and 101. He is now an independent advisor to creative businesses and director of effectiveness at the IPA. Hello, Laurence. Where does the Media Leader podcast find you today?
I'm at home in St Margaret's between Richmond and Twickenham, South West London, and very happy to join you.
Good. Now, one of the most seriously taken awards schemes, I suppose, in advertising is the IPA Effectiveness Awards. It's a really big deal to be selected for an IPA Effectiveness Award, not only for the recognition and marketing value it provides to the people in business involved, but the insights that are contained within the awards papers. Even for people like me, journalists covering this industry, they provide real learnings, but mostly for agencies, media owners, marketers. They're interested in creating really impactful work that gets a return on whatever their marketing investment and media spend is. So the award shortlist is coming around the corner. I want to ask you about them. You only do these every 2 years, don't you? The shortlist is going to be announced formally in September. We're not going to reveal the shortlist now, I don't suppose, but there is something I wanted to bring you on to talk to about today, and that's the trends behind what you're seeing, particularly media's involvement in market-leading advertising work. So we'll get into that, but just, Laurence, firstly, please give an overview of what companies need to do to submit an entry, how the judging process works. Has anything changed with the Effectiveness Awards in recent years?
Well, in a good way, very little has changed since the awards were first devised in 1980. There's been some nuanced change over the years. We're coding the papers in more and more different ways because that helps analysis after the event. But the premise of it and the philosophy of it, which is proving out once and for all, not just that advertising works, but also shining a light on how advertising works, is as true today in 2024 as it was 44 years ago. And to your point about the gift it gives the industry isn't just a sort of shot of adrenaline and goodwill for any winning authors, agencies or clients, but it's also the fact that all of the learning in these papers cascades into the IPA data bank, which is our kind of well of knowledge about effectiveness that anyone can then draw from. And that's the piece that gives journalists, for example, more than just a list of shortlisted winners and case studies. It brings out some, broader, deeper truths. Most obviously and famously, the long and the short of it. So a point of view on how you should distribute media monies over horizons to return maximum profit. So it's a great award show in its own right, but it also is massively enhanced by the kind of back end that it creates for the industry generally.
Yeah, what's it been like? Because you've been involved with the IPA for about a year now, I think, and you as an agency founder, brand strategy thinker, you were entering papers over many years. What's it like to be on the inside now?
It's fascinating, and it's reassuring to see quite how seriously the awards are administered and judged. Even getting selected to be a judge is quite a big deal, because these papers, the format is open, so there's no sort of pro forma to fill in quickly. You can write up to 4,000 words as your case study to provide plausible and persuasive evidence that advertising, small a, it comes in many forms, maybe we'll come back to that advertising is paid back over whatever time frame you might be looking. And pretty much everyone takes the 4,000 words. And the judging is taken incredibly seriously. So there are 3 waves of judging. Round 1, technical judges, because around half of our winners have quite complicated econometrics or simpler modeling that still requires someone to keep the tires on it. So there's a kind of data cleansing round. Doesn't shortlist, but would point out any flaws in a model or any doubts, or equally sort of commendation of a particular model. They then reach the industry judges, who are people who've often won in the past, so they're keeping the benchmark super high. That's the shortlisting jury. And then your gold, silver, bronze, Grand Prix, etc., are awarded by a jury of clients only, always chaired by a C-suite exec. This year, Catherine Kehoe, the Chief Customer Officer of Nationwide. So you have to jump through a lot of hurdles to get one of these things, but that's what makes them valuable. You know, if you've survived the scrutiny of your peers and then clients against commercial return, not vanity metrics or even the intermediate metrics that creative agencies and media agencies often use, it's about pound, shilling, pence return, and whether you can prove that that has come from and can only have come from advertising activity.
And what were your observation? I mean, compared to even 2 years ago, what were the top line things you might think are different compared to 2 years ago?
It's a good question. I mean, the very top line is record numbers of entries, record entry levels. I think we've had the highest number of entries since 1992. So that's a 32-year high. My maths is correct, which itself tells you something about the state of effectiveness in our industry. I think there's more appetite for it and more competence in the field, perhaps, and than there has been for a long while.
And why do you think that is?
Well, the single biggest trend that I can attach this to is actually the growth in media agency entries, Omar. And we get a handful of direct from client entries. Most come from creative and or media agencies and or collaborative papers. The trend that's unstoppable over the last 2, 4, I suspect 6, 8, 10 years is more media agency participation in their own right or as a collab. And I think that's because media agencies clearly have access to all the data, are often running pretty complicated dashboards, are often the people putting together exactly the kind of MMM or econometric modeling that I was suggesting. Whereas in the old days, that may not have been happening within what was then known as an advertising agency. And it was the creative agencies that tended to be the storytellers. And they would talk about the context for this advertiser, the strategic solution, the creative solution, and only then would you sweep up media. And I think what's interesting is we now have a lot of media agencies saying, I'm going to have a run at one of these either by myself or in tandem, and I'm going to make sure the media story is just as well told as the creative story. So I think that you can genuinely see that even over, I think you asked me versus 2022. So even versus 2022 and definitely versus 2020, we're now getting about 1 in 3 papers being media agency entries, whereas even 4 years ago, something like 1 in 5. So that over a short period of time, that I think is quite dramatic. And it chimes with my experience. You know, you said earlier, I've been at the IPA for a year or so. It chimes with my experience going in and out of agencies, because that's my job now. You know, they're my clients rather than actual clients. And I think media agencies have ridden some of the pressures on the industry better than many creative agencies. They've always been very commercially astute, and I think have understood, first of all, that there were new media available to their clients and often more measurable, at least that was the claim, than some of the legacy players or analog players. They've also been really astute about working out that the world looks complicated if you're on advertising now. How do I know which bits of my spend are working? What should I be doubling down on? What should I be taking out of the mix? And I think I'm meeting more and more heads of effectiveness in media agencies than ever, literally their job title. Because effectiveness is everyone's job, right? But there are more and more people with that job title and that specialism within media agencies, and therefore perhaps that flows through into IPA awards.
Yeah. This is fascinating. One of the big themes for us on the Media Leader this year, whether it's the stuff we're putting out on the website, the daily newsletter, our live events, there's been new ideas around delivering creativity through media. And it's obviously come about from, there are lots of reasons. There's been a lot of excitement in the last couple of years around generative AI, new forms of delivering dynamic creative at scale. But probably, to your point just now, probably also from a longer term trend of media agencies doing relatively better than creative ad agencies since the pandemic. By better, I mean protecting budgets from being squeezed by clients who always want more for less, by not letting as many people go, by being able to offer other data-led marketing services in addition to bread and butter media planning and buying. They're doing this in ways that traditional ad agencies just haven't been able to do. So I guess, does it seem more and more like media agencies are where most of the insights about advertising effectiveness are coming from? Or do you have a sense of they just have the people that this might actually not be a long-term trend? It's just they've ridden this wave well for now.
It's a great question. I mean, I think this is a long view answer rather than an IPA answer. But look, the change in our industry over the last 10, 15 years has been really about the supply side, hasn't it? One of my choices now as an advertiser, over what horizon will those choices crystallize in the form of sales or profits? And I think it's no surprise, therefore, that media agencies, with their proximity to the supply side, have been quick to develop their business models, ideally bring new creative opportunities to the table rather than just new, you describe them as planning and buying opportunities to the table. But I do think there's a parallel trend in creative agencies, and you'll know the obvious sort of poster boys for this. I think there is more understanding in creative agencies about how brands grow and how advertising works, or at least there are more sort of oven-ready rules about how that works. You know, we know from Ehrenberg Bass that penetration rather than frequency tends to be behind brand growth. So set audacious reach examples in media. We know that emotion and creative fame work to create either long-term memory or other people call mental availability. So that's the stuff that pulls through really long, deep advertising outcomes. And I think my observation of creative agencies is that they understand that and are better able to make the case for their work as a result, rather than trust me, I'm an ad man or be brave. I think there's a new confidence around the kind of stuff that works. So I think both things are happening at the same time. I think media agencies and certainly the holding group numbers would tell you this. Media agencies have been better at building their business out at the same time as changing, whereas some creative agencies have struggled to monetize their insights in the way that media agencies have.
Yeah. And what about the big idea in the entries that you've seen this year? How much is the big idea prevalent? I interviewed Sir John Hegarty of our Future of Brands event last year, and I was challenging him on this, you know, the idea about the big idea still being able to last in a world where audiences are fragmenting. You've got to deliver different messages to different audiences at scale increasingly. He politely informed me that suggestion was bullshit, and that he said he explained that the big idea, in his view, has never been more important. It's just that the way you execute it has to change. Funnily enough, fast forward a year, he gave an interview to the Times a couple of months ago where it seemed like his position had changed. I've written about that recently. What do you say? What's the data telling you? How much, you know, one of the most celebrated campaigns, at least IPA Effectiveness, has been Tesco Love Stories, for example. Really strong, purposeful work that you see this thread running through all the advertising work. I mean, how much do you see the big idea still campaigns, really effective campaigns, being part of that?
So, as a rule, or as a rule of thumb, our awards still seem to make the case for, or arguably skew towards, big ideas with long run effects. Because, not to put too fine a point on it, the big rewards to advertisers are rolled up over years. And certainly the profit return is rolled up over years. And that's often because pricing effects, so something we haven't talked about for a long time because we've been in an era of very low inflation, but suddenly pricing effects have been really important. And I love this year's batch of papers because there are 2 or 3 that really explore how advertising has allowed the brand in question to charge a premium. Those pricing effects take time to pull through, but they are solid gold because price premium falls straight to the bottom line in a way that simply increasing volume doesn't, because that brings attendant costs. So we're seeing more of that. Back to your opening question, though, big versus small. I think the answer is both. I know that's a bit of a cop out, but it's also the truth. So our awards long list includes people like Yorkshire Tea, and a campaign that's been running for 8-10 years in recognisable form, no change of end line. Actually, not much media innovation. I mean, they're smart, but they double down on broadcast because that's where their tea drinkers are. We've got Specsavers in the mix. How long has that campaign been running? 20, 25 years? Should have gone to Specsavers. It's actually a paper about their home service. So it's an inversion of that idea, but it's still the same big idea. Should have gone to Specsavers. No, they came to me. That's still the same big idea. We've got Guinness in there. Big idea. We've got McDonald's in there. I think it's a big idea, although it's largely around tone of voice and how the brand speaks to us. Equally, we've got some really small ideas, which I love. Now, whether they get shortlisted or not is a moot point. We'll actually find out quicker than you suggested because we're trying to release the shortlist earlier this year. But, we've got a paper in the mix, which is from a hand car wash business based in Sydney. And it's about how they used text messages to drive their business. So very sort of time-sensitive, data-sensitive use of a kind of throwaway medium that most people don't even think of as an advertising medium. Timely use of text messages to sell availability at the hand car wash. I mean, it's a brilliant little thing. And I think the awards are at their best when they actually touch on big ideas and small, because that's the world we now live in, right? There isn't really a kind of threshold budget in the way that when I first started in the industry, an advertiser simply had to have to be an advertiser. You if you're a D2C and you're starting off with a bit of search and a bit of social, that's advertising. And I'd love us to be shining a light on brands that are at that stage in the advertising journey, not just, to your point, Tesco, M&S, Aldi, our incredible list of Grand Prix winners. They tend to be kind of the cream of the crop. I like the fact that we've got a text message paper. I like the fact that we've got a paper about search from H&M as they sort of completed their pivot from physical retail into digital. That is advertising in 2024, unless people want to contest whether search is an advertising medium. I've heard it described as a point of sale medium, but that's by the by. I treat it as advertising. I think it's what our agencies are involved in, and it's really good to see some best practice from that area, not just what you and I would understand as big idea, brand investment return.
Yeah, if you're in the business of championing great work on behalf of advertisers that actually makes a difference to, as you mentioned right at the start, that actually makes a difference to pounds and pence, then you have to look at what they're doing with search, another form of, I guess, what you might bucket as performance media. But there's definitely a there. There's definitely people doing better than others. Do the entries give you an insight into if they're thinking media first to any degree?
Quite difficult to tell. So remember that these are read first rather than presented. So we love our winners, yet to be announced, and often then make sure they have a stage at our conference in October, come into the IPA, ideally as a client media agency and creative agency combo, so that you can begin to understand what came first. Was it client brief? Was it creative inspiration? Was it some media thinking? It's difficult to tell just from a 4,000 word paper because they tend to have a sort of sequential effect. But I would be very surprised, given the upswing in media agency participation, if we weren't seeing more evidence of media, not just driving outcomes, but driving the actions along the way. So you'll remember I got into a bit of a squabble with Nick Manning last year in the pages of Media Leader, because I suggested that from my vantage point as a creative agency person, that media agencies are increasingly impressive and respected at owning the budget conversation, the investment conversation, the payback conversation, and therefore leading the dance. Now, Nick's version was no, client must always lead the dance, and I'll give him that because he's Nick Manning. But I do think, you're talking to someone who's been in the business 33 years, Omar, and I remember the era when media agencies were the last few, charts, if there was time, and where choices were simpler, right? So maybe that was the correct allocation of time. Well, I suspect it was wrong-headed and it was just creatives hogging the ball. But we've come a long way since it was the last few charts in a pitch presentation. And I don't see that changing. The world is simply too complicated for you not to have a great running mate in media.
Yeah. Well, it's also complicated things on the content creation side as well. I mean, I want to ask you about reflections on Cannes Lions recently, what you thought about that. But the thing I've written about recently is I really like the idea of something that was new for this year that they created was the Creator Pass, where it was a special discounted rate for, let's call them influencers. It's not just influencers, but freelancers that be working directly with brands, not affiliated with big agencies. These are people that might not even ever set foot in an agency, but they're involved in the whole content creation business commercially, and increasingly on the media editorial side as well. There is so much that is happening in this industry that's outside of big agency land. And I like the fact that Cannes Lions was at least acknowledging that and opening the tent wider to accommodate those people. I mean, do you think you could ever see an august organization like the IPA still championing market leading work, but trying to similarly diversify the sorts of entries and the sorts of work that you're considering?
Yeah, emphatically. So on the one hand, I think I'm right in saying this year's long list doesn't have much in the way of AI, for example. I think that will change. I think that will pull through in the next edition. It doesn't have as much as I would hope around influencers, because I think that is still relatively sort of virgin turf for proving out effectiveness to IPA standard. And, the IPA is a broad church. It includes influencer agencies in our membership. We are putting together our conference for October, and we have, touch wood, a really good head-to-head big beauty business, which uses influencers. Of course it does. And small beauty business, which uses influencers. Doubly, of course it does. So we absolutely want to not just sort of cover that turf, but also work out, firstly, back to the top, proof that this kind of advertising works, number one, and then how it works. And does it work differently to other stuff? So our appetite for that is huge. I, like you, was pleased to see that Cannes is proliferating in that way. The $1 million question is still, I think it works. Show me that it does. Give me some case studies and help me to understand if it's different to how the other stuff I do works. How much of it should I be doing? I think there's still a lot of questions in that space. And to your point, it's partly because it's more federal, that there aren't many agencies with effectiveness skills who are in this space, but it's changing. And you will definitely see us representing those kinds of case studies and that kind of advertising.
Yeah, definitely a lot of work in there. I'm sure there are consultants out there that would use rigorous analysis to make the case for why influencer advertising works. We shall see. And I think the last time you came on the podcast, Laurence, was to talk about Cannes Lions. What about the one just gone this summer? What did you think of the work this year? You don't need to name specific Grand Prix that you thought was amazing, but yeah, just in terms of the trends that you saw, we talked quite a lot about purpose last year, if you remember. What was different at all this year?
So I think a couple of things about the awards themselves, and then maybe touching on something around the show itself. I mean, I thought it was a very good year, arguably not a great year. I'll let other people work out what the difference between those is. I loved both the film Grand Prix, the Sydney Opera House and the Orange France women's football team spot, although I also agreed with the jury chair who said we need more short form, because they were both very good bits of long form communication. I'm really interested, of course I am, in the fact that creative effectiveness is having a bit of a moment at Cannes. I think anyone who was there was surprised or delighted to see quite how much attention was put on effectiveness and outcomes, not just ideas and craft. Now, can call it creative impact, but within that stream, I think there was something like 31 different events, including Mark Ritson speaking at Cannes for the first time, including Adam Morgan riffing on the extraordinary cost of dull. So there's a big creative impact work stream, which included us, by the way. And then, interestingly, perhaps most interestingly, I also heard rumors that if even a creative entry did not have something in the box on the awards entry marked impact, judges were encouraged to not award it. Now, I don't think that was black and white, but I think it was definitely guidance to judges that unless you think this thing or have seen that this thing has had some kind of impact, open brackets, in the real world, probably can't win. I think a little of that is very helpful. I think if the whole thing turns into a kind of creative effectiveness festival, I think that there inevitably will be a little of the magic lost, because, remember where Cannes came from. It started in Venice, alongside the Venice Film Festival, to reward the very best cinema advertising. That's what it was. It ran alongside a celebration of film. And it was largely adored and loved by production companies. Next chapter, it was ad agencies / creative agencies co-opting the agenda and the move to Cannes. Now it hosts, as you've seen, the big global tech platforms and more clients than ever before. And I think along the way, either led by that or to help lead that, I think it is developing this new sort of muscle memory around, well, what actually works. So I don't think that's going to change. I think eventually it houses the best work, and then at least a parallel work stream around the stuff that worked. And that's how, if you're AB InBev or P&G or PepsiCo or Heineken, that's how you get the bill signed off, right? To go to the south of France. To go to a festival of creativity, maybe, Omar. To go to a festival of creative effectiveness, probably going to sign that check. So there's definitely something. There's definitely something in the water.
Is that where you see creative effectiveness going? It's just going to go more in that direction.
I think if you're sitting in a media agency, I would encourage you to get closer to your creative agency always, because I think an understanding of creative people, creative ideas, where they come from, why and how a creative person's got there, why certain contexts might matter. I think that's really important. And I always say to creative agencies as well, stay super close to your media peers, because we did create a kind of rift, sometimes even a sense of competition between creative and media agencies, which I think was mad. So I think media agencies need to get more fluent at creative effectiveness. I think they have to become both more sophisticated and more simple, if that's not an impossible trick to pull off, because they're putting together all these different metrics, sometimes from self-serving suppliers, and they also then need to pass it up neatly to the CMO, to the CEO. And so I think we're going to see more and more sophistication and more simplification of reporting and outputs. I think the other thing that's coming, though, and it's already here, it's a classic case of the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed, is migrating even from that kind of commercial creative effectiveness dashboard to more of a triple P playbook. Because sooner or later, I think pretty much all brand owners are going to be obliged to report more fully on their impact on the planet, and probably to report more fully on their impact on people, as well as their impact on profit. And it's been my good fortune, attached to my new role, to talk to some CEOs who are running very progressive companies, people like Luke, the founder at Lucky Saint, Douglas, the chief chocolonely at Tony's. And when they talk about their business, they're not just talking about their brands and profit, although they are. They're also talking about their people and the planet. And I think at the moment, that's a separate kind of work stream within client companies, and often a separate one to the marketing department at all. But smart marketeers are at least part of that conversation, or making sure that the marketing conversation is actually about that. How can we sell more without destroying the planet? How can we sell less even, but at a higher price point? How can we create what I've heard described as more clean share in a market? Maybe that's what success looks like.
What do you mean by clean share?
Stuff that doesn't damage the planet. So clean. Imagine clean. Clean share for Tony's, for example, is a chocolate category where way fewer of the beans are sourced by plantations using child labor. And that will happen if Tony's grows, but it will also happen if people start buying their beans from Tony's, which is happening. I think Waitrose is the first UK retailer to buy their beans from Tony's. But the reason for dwelling on it in a conversation about effectiveness is that's a very legitimate marker of the effectiveness of your brand and business and the various campaigns it runs, that you are helping to change a category's share from being either bad for planet or bad for people into a category that's a higher share of brand that is good for planet, good for people, as well as profit. So I think that's the next super wave, if you imagine, of reporting. And I think if I look at future IPA awards, I'd be very surprised if we didn't see more of those kinds of stories, because they're beginning to be told. I know, for example, about the eBay Love Island sponsorship. Winner of the AdNet Zero Awards last year, I think, had a great example of using advertising budget or sponsorship budget to drive the growth of pre-loved clothes. That's good for eBay's business, but it's also good for the planet in a world where there's too much fast fashion. So I think we'll see more and more of those stories.
And you already mentioned already, but I wanted to ask you about it. Something which got a fair bit of buzz at Cannes was Adam Morgan's talk. He spoke alongside John Evans from System 1 about the extraordinary cost of dull. I wanted to know what you thought about that. For anyone listening who doesn't know, in a nutshell, the cost of dull is the extra amount of media money that you need to get the same commercial return as if you'd spend it on a more interesting campaign. So in the case of a typical TV campaign in the UK, Peterfield and System 1 have estimated, using IPA data of course, that a dull campaign would have to spend £10 million more on media to have the same commercial return as a more interesting campaign. So tell me, Laurence, what's the interesting thing here? Is it the scale of the extra spend that's surprising, because it's harder to cut through by just spending a lot of money on TV because of changing media habits? What's the key thing about this cost of dull work?
I think there's three bits to it. I mean, for the record, I love this work. We were in it at the beginning because Adam and Peter looked, as you say, at IPA Data Bank cases and proof points, just to test the hypothesis right at the beginning. So we like this a lot. I think there are three things that are cute about it. The first is it flips the conversation from the upside of doing something brave to the downside of doing something conservative or guaranteed. And I think that's just really important for the industry, because it frames that conversation and those debates around creative work in all its different stripes as a really sort of business-like conversation, not one around bravery. It basically says the cost of distribution of a dull idea is higher than the cost of distribution of an interesting, or dare we say, exciting idea. Now that seems to have obvious resonance as soon as someone has pointed it out like that. So I think number one, it's just a clever inversion of the existing sort of logic and conversation agencies have with clients. Secondly, it is the scale of that upside or that penalty. It's a real kind of rabbit out the hat moment when Adam goes, let's just see, how much this costs advertiser A, producing dull copy versus advertiser B. And the £10 million is an extraordinary sum of money. That's annual cost to the company, which could otherwise be spent elsewhere or recorded as profit. So I think the second thing is just the sheer scale of it. It's even bigger in the States, as you know, obviously, because the penalty of distributing in a population 7 times bigger than ours is even higher. So I think the figure is the second bit. The third bit that I think is really helpful is it starts to become a narrative and a conversation piece for our industry. So we were talking earlier about how media agencies have jumped on media innovation, for example, as being the source of creativity. I think this really helps creative agencies have conversations with their clients about doing more interesting work. And in the end, that is in the interest of audiences as well as the advertiser themselves. So I think the more the industry can make the case for interesting work, the more everybody wins, because, the AA's trust data will tell you that people distrust advertising because of bombardment and because they don't like certain categories being on air. But when they're asked what they'd like or what would restore trust, it's nothing to do with that. It's to do with better work. The single best thing we can do to restore trust in advertising, as well as the single best thing we can do for our clients, is to do great work. And I think what Adam's struck is a kind of quite a powerful seam that supports that, based, as I say, at first from IPA data, but now proved out in many different ways. So I think he's making a really big contribution to the debate.
Yeah. I wrote my weekly column that I've written last week, but because of the time we're recording it, I've actually written it, but you won't have seen it, Laurence, because we haven't published it at the time of recording. But I write about this idea about risk in content creation and how we've moved into a world where, because of the hegemony of platforms like Facebook and Google, where they've got a fantastic business model where they platform content without having to take the risk to commission content. And that's led to a lot of de-risking in the industry. So that's why you're seeing things like in movies, it's the same superhero franchises, appeals to nostalgia. Same thing with Saturday night TV. It's all reality TV formats and tried and tested things. There's a lack of innovation for that very reason. And I think it comes when I hear about cost of dull, and if you look at a standard TV ad break as your litmus test for what's good in terms of general popular big spend advertising, I tend to look at it. I don't need you to comment on this, but I tend to look at it personally as a lot of really well produced, boring stuff. Really well produced. The ads you see on TV, just you see the example, are very, very well produced, but generally the ideas are just quite safe and quite boring. And I wonder just if just fear of a very cautious business climate we're seeing right now is to blame for all of that, rather than there just being an ignorance about it.
Look, I'm nodding at my end, Omar, because I totally understand and share that observation and frustration. I think advertising has been de-risked, and it isn't a coincidence that's happened in the era of allegedly measurable outcome-based certainties offered up by the tech platforms. They're unwinding some of their measurement focus, most obviously moving on from last click attribution, which is still a little pervasive, but I think most people understand how wrong-headed that is as a sole measure of effectiveness. I think they were selling certainty, and that's pretty powerful for any brand owner, especially a brand owner going through tricky economic times. The trouble is that they could be precisely wrong rather than roughly right. And I probably grew up in the roughly right era where we couldn't be exactly sure what returns we'd see, but we knew roughly what they were and we knew roughly when they'd accrue. So maybe this is a point where we begin to turn the tide again. I think we have kind of overcorrected towards spending short and spending on vanilla. And I think whether it's Adam's work, whether it's Ubiquity's work about how sustained advertising outcomes can be, way beyond the 3 months of airtime, whatever it might be, I think begin to be part of this sort of higher narrative around thinking long rather than just short, taking risks rather than producing vanilla. And in the end, as I say, delighting audiences, because that's the win for us all. That's when media owners win, when they have great advertising within their walls. That's when clients win, because we can prove that work that is liked works harder. And that's when our agency bench wins as well, because that's simply more valuable to be selling to clients. So I think if we work back from audiences and try to surprise and delight them rather than disappoint you on a Saturday night, Omar, I think only good can come from it.
I'll be fine. Don't worry. Okay, Laurence. That's unfortunately all the time we have. What's the best way to keep up with the awards? What you're doing with the IPA and the effectiveness work more generally?
First of all, I'm hoping that shortlist will find its way into public domain end of this month, July. So keep eyes peeled for that. Our awards night is on Monday, the 7th of October, followed by our conference on Wednesday, the 9th, which has already got some fabulous content lined up and can be found at ipa.co.uk. So all of our program, our coaching all the way through to our awards can be found there. The single big thing that's opening as soon as these awards close is our accreditation of agencies, which is, again, a client-judged testimony to whether you've set your agency up to habitually create effective outcomes for your clients rather than by accident. So that runs in our sort of quiet effectiveness awards year. Last year we had 31 winners. I think that's the reason we've got some new agencies in the mix for our effectiveness awards this year, because they've already passed their effectiveness accreditation. So I think we're trying to create a kind of escalator where you build out your culture around effectiveness as an agency. You're then set up to enter these really, really hard awards, and so on and so on. So hopefully it's a sort of virtuous circle. So that opens, I'm pretty sure, back end of this year.
Very good. Laurence Green is IPA Effectiveness Director. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Omar.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader podcast. This episode was edited by our production partners, Trisonic. You can find and listen to all our episodes on our website at themedialeader.co.uk or wherever you get your podcasts. But just remember, please do subscribe to be notified when we release our next episode. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm editor Omar Oakes. Our executive producer is Jack Benjamin. See you next time.